Alright guys, so CNN is out with a new investigation into the college protests that we have seen across the United States against Israel's genocidal war on the people of Gaza, as well as against their universities and our government's complicity in that genocide. And this investigation is really interesting to me because it basically completely contradicts the commentary that I have seen from CNN anchors, where they have been characterizing these pro-Palestine protesters as anti-Semitic and as violent and as a threat and all of that. And then this investigation comes in and basically confirms what I was reporting to you guys at the time, that with this specific encampment here, the UCLA encampment, the students themselves were actually entirely peaceful, and it was the pro-Israel counter-protesters who were incredibly violent, and then the police as well, who came in after the counter-protesters and were also extremely violent towards the pro-Palestine people. So let's just go ahead and hop into this, because the details that they have uncovered are pretty wild.
This is the worst violence of any of the ongoing college protests. UCLA, where counter-protesters used sticks and boards against a pro-Palestine encampment. It was more than 3 hours of unrestrained violence the night of April 30th that led to injuries and bloody scenes, as campus security and law enforcement allowed it to continue.
They were there spraying, they were there pulling barriers, and they were there to very clearly do some serious harm to the students who were on campus.
When you look at the counter-protesters, how many of them were UCLA students?
I would say basically none of them.
Who are the most aggressive offenders? A CNN investigation of hundreds of videos from multiple sources shows many of them are outsiders, not UCLA students. Among the people who showed up that night, far-right with no apparent connection to the Middle East war, others driven by Israel beliefs. Among them, this man. He strikes a pro-Palestine protester with a long white pole and is part of a mob that pummels the man as he falls to the ground. Stop. He's seen in multiple videos wearing this white mask, striking the barriers, throwing objects into the encampment. Without his mask, we see who he is. 18-year-old Idan On of Beverly Hills, a senior at a local high school.
Come inside to the kitchen. How do I get inside?
I spoke with his mother.
Hi there. Are you Sharon? Hi. How are you? Hi. Let me introduce us.
She did not want to be on camera, but quickly identified her son from this picture at UCLA that night. She described in detail how her son found the mask and pole on the ground, and said he was defending himself in this fight. On her Facebook page, Idan On's mother posted and circled a screen grab of her son from a local TV station. She wrote in Hebrew, "Idan went to bully the Palestinian students in the tents at UCLA." Idan's mother and father proudly support Israel and defended their son's actions at UCLA, saying he is heading to Israel to join the IDF. After our interview, she texted to say Idan denies being at UCLA. Older men were also at the front of the violence. Tom Bibian recorded pulling bike racks, plywood, kicking protesters, throwing cones at the students in the encampment, water bottles at protesters, and yelling expletives. We went to ask Bibian why he'd gone to the campus that night.
Hi, you're Mr. Bibian.
Yeah, can you turn that off? You don't have permission to record me.
Bibian was wearing the same jacket he had on in the video from UCLA. He's a Los Angeles resident, age 42, seen at a 2022 pro-Trump protest outside the Los Angeles FBI office. He did not want to explain why he's on video doing this.
You're being a little rude, and I'm going to call the police if you don't leave.
Sure. Okay.
We identified not just Tom Bibian, but other older men who have no apparent affiliation with UCLA.
I mean, you've seen them at how many other events?
Lots of different events, school board meetings, city council meetings.
Angie Gavant is a Los Angeles area public school mom who's been tracking right-wing protesters in her area. The group who she'd seen protesting gay rights in public schools were drawn to UCLA that night.
The revolution ain't happening tonight. Man down, man down.
Though they were clearly at UCLA that night, There's no evidence these men participated in the violence.
Here comes the Jew song, man. Cover your ears.
The man who is live streaming, Narek Polyan, appears to be a persistent agitator who posts anti-Jewish tropes on his social media accounts.
Okay, so let's back it up here a little bit and just pause on this real quick. So essentially what happened here, guys, is every single accusation that was made against the pro-Palestine protesters by our media, our politicians, our police, actually applies to the counter-protesters, right? So the accusations against the pro-Palestine people, the students, were, you're a bunch of outside agitators, you're not real students. Remember when Eric Adams and many other people said that as well, right? They're not real students, they're just professional outside agitators. That was one of the accusations. We also had, okay, they're wildly anti-Semitic. They're basically pro-Nazi. They're pro-Hamas. That was another allegation. And the third allegation was that the student protesters were incredibly violent. All three of those, turns out, did not apply in any way, shape, or form to the actual student protesters, but did apply to the counter-protesters, the pro-Israel protesters who showed up to violently attack them. I mean, we literally have guys who are posting straight up Nazi memes on their social media accounts. And they were there on the pro-Israel side. What does that say? What does that say? These were actual outside agitators, right? If you want to come up with an actual example of a professional outside agitator, whatever that means, that was a terminology that Mayor Eric Adams used. But, like, this is what an actual outside professional agitator looks like. I mean, these are guys who go to a bunch of other protests as well, MAGA protests and other ones, right? And they're actually posting literal Nazi imagery on their social media platforms. So, every accusation was a confession, it turns out. And all of these guys that were featured here, as far as I'm aware, none of these guys have been arrested. I mean, they went and they interviewed this guy. He's just walking around free. He's going peacefully back to his house, right? After violently attacking peaceful student protesters who are protesting against a genocide. So these people got to walk free. You know who didn't get to walk free? The students. Because the day after, the police stood by and allowed these pro-Israel protesters to shoot fireworks, to beat people with metal pipes, to crack people's skulls, to do all of this, to bear spray people, pepper spray, whatever it was. After they stood by for hours allowing that to happen, the next day they went in and they brutally attacked the UCLA encampment as well. They were shooting rubber bullets, you guys remember that video, indiscriminately into the encampment, and then the students get mass arrested. So the people who actually instigated the violence, they get to walk free. The peaceful anti-war, anti-genocide student protesters, they get tossed into a jail cell for the night. I mean, what are we doing, guys? What are we doing? And here's the thing, guys. CNN came out with this investigation, I think it was yesterday, but this was all stuff that I was telling you guys was happening in real time. I mean, I made a video the day or the day after this entire situation unfolded on the UCLA campus, and what this investigation just showed is exactly what I told you guys at the time. So it's not like it was difficult to figure out that this was the dynamic, it's just that the entirety of our media ecosystem, mainstream media ecosystem, and the entirety of our mainstream political class was just lying about it the entire time. I mean, CNN, the same exact network that just a couple weeks ago, you had Dana Bash, one of their top, journalists on the network, who was comparing the student protesters to literal Nazis in this absolutely unhinged segment that I covered on the channel. I mean, comparing them to Nazis, saying this is like 1930s Germany. Meanwhile, it was actually the Nazis on the other side of the encampment. Now, we also have stuff like this because I want you guys to be reminded about what these students are actually being arrested for and whether or not it's even charges that will stick. So here we have a judge from Providence, and he has issued a not guilty filing for 41 Brown University pro-Palestine protesters who were arrested for trespassing. Judge Nicholas Perillo said that he was going against the objections of the City of Providence and Brown University in issuing the not guilty filing to the protesters because none of them had a criminal record and because he said he thinks they held a respectful protest. He said, quote, "I think this is a reflection of what nonviolent and peaceful resistance, frankly, is supposed to look like. Here you have a judge, after the police cracked down, brutally arrested dozens of students at this university, a judge is circling back and he's like, sorry, I don't care what the university wanted. I don't care what the police wanted. These students were engaging in like a textbook example of a nonviolent, peaceful resistance movement." Even the judge is saying that. Now, just to recap what has happened over the last couple of weeks amidst these protests, I mean, the Washington Post, riot police and over 2,000 arrests, a look at 2 weeks of the campus protests. So thousands of arrests were made. You know, many of those cases ended up getting tossed out, but thousands of arrests were made, students and professors and faculty included in that. You know, we also have reporting at the same time, there was an analysis that was done of 553 protests in solidarity with Palestinians between April 18th and May 3rd, and they found that 97% of them did not cause any serious damage. So again, I mean, contrast that with what the media has been saying. They're comparing this to the rise of Nazis in Germany in the 1930s. Meanwhile, actual evidence, right, of what's actually been happening on the ground, 97%. Almost the entirety of the protests have caused not just no violence, but not even any destruction, right? Not even any like property destruction, right? 97%. We also had this that just came out yesterday. So this California University president was just put on leave for insubordination after he met some of the Gaza protesters' demands. So not only if you're a protester and you're entirely peaceful and you're engaging in a kind of protest like an encampment or a sit-in that has been used in plenty of other examples throughout, you know, U.S. history and the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, etc., not only will you as a student be brutally cracked down on and possibly suspended or expelled, but even if you are the president of the university, you could still end up losing your job for meeting some of the demands of the protesters. Keep in mind, the protesters are not demanding, like, the destruction of Israel. They're not demanding that the university goes and partners with Lockheed Martin and sends a fucking missile towards Israel. They're demanding that the universities cut financial ties with an apartheid state that's in the midst of committing a genocide. That's what they're demanding, right? Is that a radical demand to say maybe these colleges shouldn't be in bed with weapons manufacturers whose sole purpose is to profit off of war? Is that such a radical demand that not only the students should be cracked down on, but the president of the university should be cracked down on as well? I mean, Jesus Christ. We also have this. I mean, we've had these congressional hearings that have basically just been like a McCarthyite-style witch hunt of university presidents. And by the way, university presidents, like the ones who were brought before these panels, who are overwhelmingly against these protests and have been incredibly violent towards their own students, right? But this was one of the questions that I covered from one of these congressional hearings. Rick Allen, unfortunately from my home state of Georgia, he said, "Do you want Columbia to be cursed by God?" This is where we're at, guys. We had sitting members of our government, okay, sitting members of Congress, some of the most powerful people in the country, who are asking questions about biblical curses against universities for not sufficiently cracking down on students who are protesting against a genocide. They're asking about biblical curses, guys. What are we doing? What are we doing? Of course, we also had the House passing a bill to expand the definition of anti-Semitism to basically include any criticism of the government of Israel. They explicitly conflate, okay, through legislation now, criticism of Zionism with criticism of Jewish people. Incredibly dangerous stuff. And of course, also at the same time, we have Israel banning Al Jazeera at the same time that America is banning TikTok. And I think we all know why. In fact, we don't even really have to guess because our politicians will openly admit that, yeah, I mean, you know, the fact that there's pro-Palestine content on TikTok and that's overrepresented on TikTok versus American companies like Instagram and Facebook and, you know, the rest of them, you know, we have to crack down on that. We can't have that, right? So, I mean, there you have it, guys. The coverage that I brought you guys at the time on these student protests broadly, but even more specifically the UCLA one, turns out is completely vindicated. Not that it's anything impressive. It's pretty much just looking at what's actually happening and then giving an honest take on it and not just straw-manning people and coming up with bullshit smears to try to get them to crack down harder on the students. I mean, none of this is difficult, guys. It shouldn't take weeks after the fact for major news organizations who have millions of dollars at their disposal to figure out what the fuck is going on. I mean, if I can figure it out sitting here with like a $100 webcam and a $50 microphone and on my computer at home, if I can figure it out, you would think they would be able to figure it out in real time as well, and not be smearing these protesters as the new neo-Nazis, while at the same time actual neo-Nazis are attacking the peaceful protesters. I mean, all of this is just so absurd and ridiculous, and at the same time extremely dangerous and terrifying, that this is where we're at. We're willing to ban entire social media platforms. We're willing to pass legislation through Congress. We're willing to brutalize our own young people, our own students in this country. All for what? To protect a foreign government? To protect their feelings? They can't handle being criticized? To protect a genocide? That's what we're doing this for? So again, it's deeply unserious and at the same time deeply terrifying. So there you have it. I don't know if this will change people's Dana Bash. I don't know if this will change her opinion on the protests, but it is a pretty interesting phenomenon, because this isn't the first time I've seen this happen, where you'll have some investigative reporter who actually does a really good job and just like asks basic follow-up questions and figures out what's going on, and then there's a complete disconnect between that versus what the actual domestic pundits are saying on these networks every single day.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying